Hi, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here tonight in these very challenging times we're facing, a time of a mass pandemic. I'm also going a bit maverick and going live, so a lot of things could go wrong. But I just want to let you all know that I'm well, and I sincerely hope that you're well. I guess this pandemic is something that none of us have seen in our lifetime. Thousands of people dying, a virus spreading regardless of caste or creed or wealth or gender, leveling us, making us realize that we are all vulnerable, we're all impermanent, and we're all equal. I think in these times, compassion is needed as never before. Challenging times are sometimes the best teacher. And I'm not saying that we need to suffer to grow, but I'm saying what positive things can come out of this? How can we face our vulnerability with wisdom and skillfulness and remain connected, centered, useful, whole in these challenging times? So if you're watching later on, I would invite you now to turn off the video for 20 minutes and just follow your breath. Just let go of your worries and follow your breath. If you're someone who is self-isolating or social distancing, it probably means you are at home and you have more time. So that could be a really great advantage. You're like a monk or a nun for 2 weeks or a month. People always say, Ayya, I'd love to do a retreat. I've always fantasized about becoming a monk or a nun. Well, here you are. Welcome to Corona monastic life. Monastic life can be quite boring, and often we are housebound because we have no money. We're waiting for some layperson to take us out. And obviously the main point of monastic life is contemplation in seclusion. So this is what we have. Tonight I'm talking about the path of the mystic in challenging times. But first of all, I'd just like to chant the long medicine Buddha mantra. Basically, Ayurvedic and Tibetan medicine systems of healing see that there is a psycho-spiritual connection between what is going on in the world, what is going on in your mind, what is going on in your emotional body, as well as what is going on in your physical body. They see those things as a whole. And they understand that if there is something wrong in your emotional body or in society, or there's some kind of abuse, sooner or later it's going to manifest as an imbalance in the world or in people's systems. I don't mean to spiritualize a very practical problem because, just saying a mantra is not going to heal coronavirus. Following medical advice will help reduce that. But looking at how you can create a more uplifted mind state could definitely help your immunity, as well as following medical advice. So the idea of Medicine Buddha is that he's an archetype of the awakened mind that represents our own capacity to awaken and heal from our own trauma. Like Leonard Cohen said, there is a crack in everything. That is how the light gets in, that your brokenness, your challenges are your path to becoming a Buddha, an awakened Buddha, an awakened being. No mud, no lotus. And the long mantra is said in Sanskrit, but basically it's like homage to the great guru of healing, which is awakened mind itself, our own awakened capacity, as well as to the historical bodhisattva of medicine who devoted himself to the service of others and then became the medicine Buddha. So it's saying homage to the guru of healing, to the great guru, to the great doctor, but it also talks about the one who is thus gone, who has realized the state of interconnected emptiness. And also, may all pain be dispelled. May all spiritual ignorance created due to craving, ignorance, self-grasping, attachment be dispelled. May all negative emotions be dispelled. May all human, by extension, may all human cruelty, which are a manifestation of, or greed, which are a manifestation of spiritual ignorance, may that also be dispelled. May all illnesses be dispelled. May there be great healing. And, you know, from a Buddhist point of view, the best kind of healing is completely going beyond ignorance, going beyond the wheel of birth and death, because, you know, the body is impermanent. That we are of the nature to age and die. The body falls apart. Doesn't mean we shouldn't take care of our body, or that our body isn't a beautiful miracle that deserves to be treated with respect. But what it does mean is that this body is not all that you are. You're not just limited to this body. You are consciousness unbound. And even that consciousness doesn't have a permanent self or soul. But you do have the potential to become a fully awakened being. So anyway, here's Medicine Buddha mantra. I don't know it that well, and I haven't really made up a tune, but I'm just going to ad-lib. Om Namo Bhagavate Besanja Guru Vedur Prabarajaya Tathagataya Arhate Samyak Sambuddhaya Teyata Om Besanje Besanje Maha Besanje Samudgate Swaha. And I'll say it again. Om Namo Bhagavate Besanje Guru Vedurya Prabarajaya Tathagataya Arhate Samyak Sambuddhaya Teyata Om Besanje Besanje Maha Besanje Samudgate Swaha. And the short mantra of Medicine Buddha. Basically, Medicine Buddha is like Shakyamuni Buddha, but blue, because it represents the unchangeable nature of mind. Like they're blue like the evening sky, which is a very hard color to change, which represents the immutable, pure nature of mind. That means no matter how much suffering you go through, no matter how many negative emotions, ego grasping, addictions have obscured your original goodness, it's always there. It's unbreakable. And he holds a medicine bowl, like a monk's bowl filled with medicine. And inside that is the Arura plant, which is found in the Himalayas in India, which is said to be a really amazing herb that he holds in his hands. And he's wearing a monk's robe, which is a symbol of morality. Doesn't mean, obviously, that being a monk is the only way to get enlightened. It's just symbolic. So, yeah, we're all really disturbed. Oh, sorry, the short mantra of Medicine Buddha. Tayata om gate gate paragate. No, sorry, wrong mantra. Tayata om be shanze maha be shanze ratsa samugate swaha. Which means homage to the healing, to the great Guru of healing. Thus may it be. So part of healing is connecting with your own pain, with your own knots, and transforming them, and transforming, working with reality, working with difficult people, difficult situations. And that is the great challenge that coronavirus is giving us. What coronavirus is doing is showing us that it's tearing down the illusion of separateness, the illusion that money, prestige, youth, beauty, wealth, being white, being able-bodied, being heterosexual, being privileged, the illusion that those things give us that we're safe. And it's showing us you are not safe, you are connected, you are vulnerable, and you share the same fate as everybody, that your life is like a candle in the wind. And none of the systems we have in place, like the economic systems which are based on profit, the healthcare system, especially in America, that's also based on profit. None of those systems are built for this epidemic. So we see it as kind of end of time, end of days. It almost feels like it wouldn't be surprising to see a kind of few zombies walking down the street, because we've never seen this kind of thing. But every generation has had wars, epidemics. We've just been lucky, that for the last maybe 50 years, most of the wars have been fought out of our soil. But people in the Middle East and so many other countries have suffered greatly, which for various reasons, which I won't go into now. But this coronavirus is the great leveler. It's showing us, we tend to think of it as a tragedy, like being locked at home, worrying, being marginalized, being afraid of other people, being afraid of getting, going outside, that whatever you get could kill you, being afraid of your own mortality, knowing that your health is fragile, a bit fearful for your loved ones, wondering how you're going to survive financially. Welcome to the life of poor and disabled people, the people that we've been forgetting for so long, But it's a humbling experience for us to check our privilege for the very people that we've marginalized. That's their living reality every day. And we're starting to see that privilege is only temporary, only superficial, an illusion, the same as economic systems, the same as culture, race, the same as so many things we've used to separate ourselves from each other and from the truth of our vulnerability and impermanence. So maybe this coronavirus could be the beginning of a new system, a system based on more equity, more compassion, more equality. I certainly hope so, because I know that many people will not be able to pay their rent for much longer, and many people will not be able to afford medical assistance. So I hope that landlords stop charging rent, that banks stop charging mortgages, so that people can survive, because it is a crisis. It's a crisis requiring compassion. Anyway, I'd like to go a little bit more into, sorry, I go off on tangents. There have always been epidemics. Epidemics are part of human existence. There's been the plague, there's been the Spanish influenza, which killed up to 50 million people 100 years ago. This is not a new thing. It's just a thing that happened in our time. The human body is vulnerable. It gets sick, it ages. So once you initially get over your shock and anxiety, start to think about how you can go on living and make the most of every moment left to you. Not in a hedonistic, end of world kind of day, like nothing matters anymore, but how can I prepare my mind? How can I live with compassion? How could I do something to be of service? How can I, give lonely people a phone call, or deliver some groceries for an elderly person, give a loan to a friend I know who is struggling financially. There are so many ways that you can create the economy of goodness, that you can feed into love and not fear, because that is what will save us. Okay, so actually, in the time of the Buddha, there was a great famine, and at that time, the monks said to the Buddha, should we leave this town where there is no food and go to a place where there is more food? And the Buddha said, no, we should stay and support the people. The Buddha was a man of the people. He left his kingdom, he left his privilege behind, and he traveled through the world as a simple beggar, a simple spiritual mendicant, dependent on the goodwill of both the poor and the wealthy. His friends were both the poor and the wealthy. He addressed sutras to all kinds of different people, men, women, high caste, low caste, all kinds, sick, well, old, young. And he said, there is someone offered them some very rough oats which are like chaff, that usually the horses eat. And so the monks lived on this for several months, I think, while the famine was going on. Imagine eating porridge every day, like with no sugar, nothing, just kind of really, with the husk on it. But, that's what they did to show solidarity with the people. And they did a lot of prayers. They did a lot of teachings. People had more time, less energy, so they uplifted them in that way. And some friends of mine, Bhante Sujato and Bhante Akaliko at Lokanta Vihara, are currently doing that at 7 a.m. I think it's Dharma Net. I have a link on my Facebook page to their chanting. They're doing it at 3 times a day. And they're just offering that service to uplift people as they stay home, so you can kind of make it your own retreat. What St. Francis and the Buddha have in common is that they were both born into wealth, born into great comfort, extremely attractive, extremely highly placed, well-loved, charismatic, handsome men, privileged, you could say. And they both lived at a really important time in history. The Buddha lived at a time where India was transitioning from a rural economy and the merchant class was becoming more powerful. And this merchant class would be the class that carried Buddhism across the borders, down the Silk Road to China, Japan, Tibet, Korea, and so many other places, Gandhara, and, even to the borders of the Roman and Greek Empire. Because these people were intellectual, questioning, logical. They were seeking, they were men of the axial age. They were men and women. They were seeking a new way. So the Buddha, broke away from the traditional Vedic society of animal sacrifices, fire pujas, lots of rituals, relying heavily on Brahmins. And he said, he said in the Kalama Sutta, don't blindly follow teachings just because your elders said it, just because it's your caste, but only follow a teaching because it makes sense to you, because it reveals a living truth to you. Test it like a goldsmith melts down gold in order to determine its purity. Adopt it because it is the truth, because it liberates you, because it makes you happy, because it shows you a broader, more expansive, wholesome path, because it transforms your heart, it liberates you. Only then. So, the Buddha was teaching something based on experience, based on truth, based on a living tradition rather than blind faith, which is why the Brahmins found him such a threat, so challenging, because everything that they were following was written in the Vedas, tradition, and it wasn't something you could practice. It was something you supported as a householder. It wasn't something you could equally participate in because it required the priestly caste to do this. And the Buddha, a lot of people view the Buddha in different ways. The Mahayana tends to view him more as a living force of awakening, that everyone can become a Buddha by following the 6 perfections of morality, patience, joyous effort. Generosity, morality, patience, joyous effort, concentration, and wisdom, with the great mind of bodhicitta, the wish to liberate all beings, including yourself, from suffering and to become a Buddha, to place all beings in liberation. The Theravada views the Buddha more as a human being, and the Vajrayana views the Buddha as like a person who could do miracles, who was, one of many Buddhas, manifesting in countless forms, in countless ways, to bring beings to awakening. And the way what I've heard in the Theravada tradition, the way that there's so much about seclusion, there's so much about the Buddha as a hermit, as someone who left the world, and one of the terms for a monk is someone who has entered the homeless life, who has entered seclusion. But actually, if you look at the way the Buddha lived, he was very much engaged. He was both a hermit, but also someone who was engaged socially in the world. He had times of seclusion, especially the 3-month rainy retreat, and he went into deep periods of retreat for the several years before he became enlightened. He was mostly in retreat and meditation. And then throughout his life, he went back into retreat and came out again. But a lot of the time he was on the road, traveling, taking to the road to teach the teachings for the benefit of the many. And a lot of his sutras, a lot of his teachings are, arose in response to someone who asked him a question, to a specific community, a specific person, a king, a woman taking water from the well, his own mother, so many of these teachings arose as a social interaction between the Buddha and someone else. So he was also a man of the people, available to the people. And he didn't just cater to powerful people. He really believed, he was the great leveler. He really showed that someone is not noble by their birth, they are noble by their actions, which was another great challenge to the Vedic caste-ridden society at the time, and what became more powerful later on that he was born into. So we see the Buddha was someone who had great compassion, and he also, he wasn't just someone who abandoned his family, who had no feeling for the suffering of others, who just went off and meditated alone and was kind of the so-called selfish saint. I don't think there could be a selfish saint, but he wasn't like a dry, heartless person. He was full of compassion. He did not just leave his family behind out of a sense of running away. He did it because for countless lifetimes he had worked towards this point where he finally made the ultimate sacrifice to seek a greater truth. And then in the end, he came back and taught that truth to his own ex-wife, who became an arhat, his own son, who became an arhat, his own father and mother, they all became monks and nuns and holders of the lineage. So he wasn't just this kind of person who left the world and never came back. He was like in the world, engaging with people, but he didn't allow the politics, the torment, the greed of the world to completely overtake him, because he had lived a life of hedonism. He had seen all the political intrigue in the palace, and it didn't make him happy. So he sought an inner truth, a citadel of unchanging deathlessness, a secure refuge that he could not find in love, romantic love, in sensual pleasure, in power, fame, beauty, none of it. And he had it all, he had it all, and he cast it aside. And that we see as a parallel in the life of St. Francis, who was pretty much Christianity's greatest saint, and the Western world's greatest saint, really. I've been told by Tibetan lamas, some Tibetan lamas, not all, your Western culture has no monastics, that's why they don't support you. You have no contemplative culture, you're very materialistic culture. And I'm like, how much do you know about our culture? How much do you know about Western culture before you dismiss it? We've always had monastics, we've always had anchorites, we've always had mystics. People valued wise men and wise women, the desert mothers, the desert fathers, from the Roman times, all down through the Middle Ages, until the Reformation. It was really the kind of Anglican, that split, that when the kind of mystics started, and the idea of full-time meditators started to disappear a little bit because of the Protestant work ethic, the idea that just meditating, just concentrating on the sacred is not real work. the idea of materialism, that only if it's in the material world it has value. So St. Francis, we have to look at him in the context of the time he came from. So like the Buddha, he came from a time where society was moving from a rural economy into a market merchant economy. And people were starting to buy, sell, trade. And he came from the merchant class, as did the Buddha. And these were people who were less superstitious, basically, and a growing, powerful class in society. And Francis had it all. He was young, he was beautiful, he was talented, he was a good musician. All the women loved him. His family had a powerful name. His mother doted on him. His father was proud of him. He dreamed of becoming a knight, of earning some fame. He went to war, and he ended up spending almost a year in a dark dungeon in Perugia, actually, when they lost and got captured by the opposing forces of Perugia. And in that time, he did a lot of soul searching and kind of saw the emptiness. He was also extremely sick. And at that time, he did a lot of soul searching and thought of facing his own mortality, realizing the superficiality of everything he devoted his life to until that point, and then seeking out the sacred, And at that time, in the early church, the priest was part of the people, and the ceremonies were small. But then slowly in the Middle Ages, the priest started to speak in Latin. The people couldn't understand it, so it became a magical ritual that they couldn't understand. And the priest did his church service with his back to the people. So really the people were spectators, they weren't equal participants. Whereas in the early days of the church, it was very small, very intimate, everybody was part of the ceremony. And then after the 1960s Vatican Council changes, the priests started speaking in the local language again and facing the people. But what Francis did, like the Buddha, was bring spirituality to the poor, to the masses, to the average person. And the clergy had elevated themselves away from the people, much as the Brahmins had made themselves elite and said, nobody can be as good as us, because we're educated, we know Latin, we know it all. Don't think for yourself, just do what we tell you. Isn't that the story of so many organized religions, so much leadership and clergy, which has led to so many bad things in the world, this kind of authoritarian power? So St. Francis left it all behind and went back to the idea of gospel poverty. This idea, if you would come, follow me, you must take nothing with you, not a bag, not a staff. Give all you own to the poor and take to the road. Do not worry where you'll lay your head. Look at the birds of the field. They do not reap nor sow, but Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed as one of these. If God cares for his creatures, would not he care for his own follower, his own seeker? And the idea of a person giving up everything for the sacred. So once again, Francis did some work, went here and there begging, so had to have daily contact with people in order to get his daily bread, lived a very poor, simple life, eschewed all power. The little brothers didn't own land. They, maybe rented for a very small amount or just restored. The first monastery they had was a donkey shed, basically. And then, they slowly started to restore old, falling down rural chapels. Sometimes they might pick some apples, for a daily meal. They might work in the field. They helped lepers, and they would preach to the poor. And then, you know, they would go for periods of time into seclusion. And, you know, as he aged and as his health got worse, Francis spent more and more time in seclusion on Mount Laverna. I think that's what it was called. And, you know, his monasteries became places of contemplation as well as study. But the friars were always engaged now and then, you know, with the local people, and they identified with the poor. Yeah. So they had, you know, the Buddha and St Francis, both merchant class, both giving it all up, both taking it out into the world, being the great leveler, saying everybody has Buddha nature, everybody is equal. Live simply, live with compassion, live with ethics, live with simplicity, devote yourself to something transcendent, something greater than yourself, to a life of the spirit. And both of them made a lasting and profound impact on the cultures that they lived in, and later on to the spread of religion in the area. But not just as a dogmatic state-owned religion, but as a reminder that everybody is sacred. Everything is sacred. You know, St. Francis was so caring for animals and performed many miracles with animals and in nature, you know, and the Buddha himself was so connected to nature, you know, born under a tree, getting enlightened under a tree, passing away under a tree, spending time in the silence of the forest. So they were both in the world, relating to people, but also having these transcendent experiences, completely going beyond caste and class, and both in their own way, mystic anchorites who spent a great deal of time in seclusion as well as in the world. So that's the opportunity that this great turning, you know, with so many things going on in terms of climate crisis, in terms of the rise of fascism, in terms of epidemics, in terms of possible, you know, recession or economic collapse, or, you know, the failing of capitalism, or, you know, at least more extreme of rich and poor. This is the challenge we face, the great turning, to go from a system of dominance to a system of nurturance, to find, even as we face these terrible challenges, see at this time, what is the sign of these empty shelves, of these people stealing all the toilet paper? It's kind of crazy. I mean, I would have gone for the canned food, but they went for the toilet paper. It's easy in these times for the worst to come out in humanity, you know, for us to become fearful. But in these times, the big squeeze, this time is the time to really show what your spiritual practice is worth. It doesn't necessarily mean that you go out and work and work and work until you die of coronavirus. But what it does mean is that you try to do many small acts of compassion, and that you try to enjoy this time, whatever time you have at home or you're stuck at home. Even if you only have time in the evening after you've gone to work and you're feeling exhausted and overwhelmed, you know, that's the time you need in these challenging times to do your spiritual practice more. And of course, you know, death is hidden away in the West. We don't want to face it. It scares the hell out of us. But it's a fate we all face, you know. And the greatest tragedy in my mind is not that we may die, but it is that we may die without having fully lived, as Thoreau said. I went to the woods because I wished to live fully. I can't exactly remember it, but I feared that when the time came to die, I would not have fully lived. So how can you fully live? Does that mean you have to go out and get drunk or have wild sex, or, you know, you can try those things, but it's more about what is the potential of your mind? How have you realized ultimate love? How have you been able to empathize with others and give them love as the presence of justice? How have you seen your privilege stripped away and your basic oneness with others? All the great teachers have said, you know, Martin Luther King and others, my liberation is bound up with your liberation, because everything we have comes from others. The fact that we have a body is given to us by the kindness of others. The fact that we have food to eat is because the farmers grew our food. The fact that we have education and didn't grow up as children working in a factory is because the unionists fought to get children into school and out of the factory. The fact that women have the vote is because the suffragettes fought for the vote and gender equality. The fact that, you know, disabled people now have some basic rights is because the previous generations of disabled people fought for their rights. The fact that people of color, Black people, Indigenous people have some rights and still need more is because of the civil rights movement. So to be spiritual is also to see that our liberation and others' liberation is bound up together. And one cannot be, you know, just focusing on one's own well-being and saying to people, you know, everything is in the mind. This is a very 1960s Buddhist slogan, you know, just fix your mind, nothing else matters. The mind is very powerful and the mind is a great place to start to fix everything. But if you're a Black man who's going to get shot when he goes out the door, no matter how positive your thinking is, no matter how many hours of meditation you've done, you could still be shot because of police violence and racial profiling. Or, you know, if you're a woman in a dangerous area, or any area for that matter, no matter how much bodhicitta meditation you do, you can still get raped, you know, because of violence against women, because of women being seen as sex objects instead of human beings who deserve to be safe, whose well-being is more important than some guy's desire for non-consensual pleasure. For him, obviously, not for her. So, you know, people can't really think about spiritual things until their basic needs are met. You know, telling a child in Syria that God loves them and they're going to be safe and they just need to think positive while the bombs are dropping is a kind of patronizing thing. Telling poor people, you know, God loves you, just meditate, just purify your mind. Telling women who are going, me too, we have a problem in our spiritual community, the lama's raping everybody, molesting women, there is no gender equality in our community, only men of a particular ethnicity hold power, women don't have a voice. You know, telling those women, this is your negative emotion, you just need to change your mind, enjoy your oppression, change your mind and accept the status quo. That's not real spiritual teachings. So to be truly spiritual is to be both a mystic, but also to be very pragmatic. So have a heart as big as the world, but wash your hands, you know. Meditate on bodhicitta and emptiness, but do your own dishes and don't support gender inequality or racism or ethnocentrism or you know, too much of a concentration of corrupt power in spiritual communities that creates abuse, because the spiritual teachings can't thrive when there is no ethics, when there is no responsible accountability and an equal spread of power in the community. And, you know, the Buddha really set up the first democracy. You know, he said the monks will make decisions communally, and it's a mix of seniority and democracy. And there were people in the community that were of various ages, of various castes, who all worked together, who came from rich backgrounds and poor backgrounds, and everybody had a say. You know, the Buddha talked about the Four Noble Truths, suffering, the cause of suffering, the state beyond suffering, and the path leading to that. What is the Four Noble Truths of coronavirus? There is suffering, there is this epidemic that could kill us. And if you look at those army trucks coming out of Italy, it's not just people over 80 who are dying. It's hospitals are completely overwhelmed. It's a significant threat. Um, there is suffering. There is a cause of suffering. What is the cause of suffering? It's coronavirus. It's an epidemic. It's having a human body. It's being born, we must die. Being in the wheel of birth and death is by nature suffering. Being controlled by negative emotions is suffering, and ignorance is suffering. Having a self-grasping ego that hasn't recognized its own emptiness is suffering. But also the structures that we create that separate us, that place some people very high and other people very low, is suffering. And it's suffering for those at the top and suffering for those at the bottom, because those at the bottom carry the burden of poverty and oppression and discrimination and low self-esteem and violence. And people at the top carry the constant guilt. Human beings I don't think are innately made for violence. It actually eats away at us inside. It does something terrible when you have to commit an act of violence. You have to kill a part of yourself. That violence you also do to others, you also do to yourself. That violence that men have perpetuated against women for generations, that white people perpetuated against people of color for generations, it has also been done to us. And you see that fundamental fear coming out anytime women step up and ask for more share of equality. You see that fear that men have that we will treat them the way they treated us. Or you see that fear that white people have that black people will treat us the way we treated them. And that is us knowing deep down that what we did was wrong. That to treat other human beings with violence and oppression is wrong. We know what is right. We just have to do it, which is sometimes hard because it means there's less privilege, that, and we're nobody. But sometimes it's a bit of a relief to not have to push and oppress someone. It's yucky to have to always push your power and reaffirm your get your power from oppressing someone else. If your power is based on oppressing someone else, it's not real power anyway. Power should come, forget power anyway. But maybe love and respect comes when someone has really earned it, when someone has really done great things like St Francis or the Buddha, or, female saints like Machiglaptron and Tara and Mahagautami, the Buddha's stepmother, who became an arhat. You don't need to oppress others to be loved. So these mystics, these so-called men, became mystics because they walked off the road most traveled and they sought the truth inside in silence. They went unknowing onto the path. They rejected the things that had come before them. They struck off on their own path, completely unknowing, stumbling in the darkness, finding the way for themselves, experimenting, going through great trials and tribulations, dark nights of the soul, and eventually coming out the other end, having faced and transformed their own demons. I mean, there's so many analogies in the life of the Buddha where Mara, the embodiment of ignorance, appears before him and says, hey, I'll give you, see everything you see before you, you can have half of this. You don't need to become a Buddha. Just rule with me. Just hang out. Don't get enlightened. Because Mara was really afraid to have an awakened being in the world. That would make his hold on greed, hatred, and delusion quite difficult. The proverbial Buddhist devil. But the devil, the Mara, the demon of ignorance, is not outside. It's inside us. That comes out when we're fearful, as you can see with what's going on now in coronavirus. And you can see in the life of St Francis, quite often there were periods where he would roll around in the thorn bushes or battle with the demons. It's often described as the demons appearing before him, but really the demons were his own desire, his own wish for a simpler, easier path, without so much renunciation, without giving up so much. And, maybe there were some extreme elements in the life of St. Francis, like the way he referred to his body as brother donkey. Maybe he was a little bit too harsh. But in the end, they inspired so many people with their example of renunciation and simplicity, that they could give everything up and still be happy. That's our greatest fear, isn't it? That we'll lose everything. But maybe when you're not too much attached, that's the ultimate wealth, when no one can take anything away from you anymore, because you're, excuse me, mentally liberated. And they had their own mystical experiences. The Buddha, on the night of his enlightenment, saw all his past lives. He could speak, he could hear any language and understand it. There's certain divine qualities that are attributed to him, whether you believe that or not. But, it was just kind of trying to describe the indescribable bliss of going beyond negative emotions, of going beyond the limitations of ignorance, of feeling connected to everything, of discovering the fruit of contemplation. There's one sutta, it says, "We who dwell in solitude, drinkers of bliss." So initially one could think, wow, the monk's life looks kind of joyless, like you're all sitting at home going, oh my God, like how many episodes on Netflix can I watch? I'm so bored. Who would want to be a monk locked up all the time with no money, no girlfriend, no hair? But actually, having given up all those distractions, one goes inside, one discovers something quite blissful, luminous, profound. When the mind is very, very subtle in meditation, that luminous abiding in peace, there's nothing quite like it. Which is why those of us who discover it keep going on the path, no matter how hard it is. And there were times people said to the Buddha, you're just a bludger, like what are you doing with your life? You don't have a real job. And he just kind of showed by example that he had discovered the greater truth, something worth giving up a normal life for. And he passed that on to his family, to his community, to the world. And St. Francis did much of the same thing, when they talk about there are no more fathers, there are no more sons. Do not store your treasures on earth where they can be eaten by moths or stolen by thieves. Put your treasure in the kingdom of heaven, and the kingdom of heaven is within. And basically, St. Francis showed the sacred, showed God, not as a judgmental, harsh God, but as a loving, he invented the nativity, right? Seeing God as the sacred, as a vulnerable child that you love and that you cherish, that like a mother, So that, to me, that's a very beautiful analogy, seeing the sacred as something you take in and care for, and not as a judgmental, dogmatic, you're going to go to hell, fearful path. I mean, it's hard to talk about that mystic mind, but I think we need, you just have to try, you just have to meditate and see how far you get and walk that road for yourself, and apply the instructions that you read in the sutras and meeting with noble friends, people who are more advanced meditators. But that kind of bliss, that kind of connection has a profound transformational effect on somebody. They really go beyond needing power, needing beauty, needing identifying with gender, identifying with the trappings of power, because they've really discovered something way more valuable than money and romantic love. Not that there's nothing, a certain amount of both of those things are wonderful and necessary. But finding an inner refuge, an unconditioned love, an unconditioned luminous state of mind, I mean, what could be better? Something that is not limited to the conditions of the world. And that's what they were both pointing to, I think. These mystics, these mystics who weren't dogmatic, they They said the finger is not the moon. The experience is the words, the teachings, the religion is only a method, a boat you use to cross to the ultimate, to the unconditioned, to the ultimate truth that you have to experience for yourself. There's no point in arguing about which boat is best. Just get on the damn boat and cross the river. And then you can talk about which boat was useful. And you notice mystics don't argue. They just smile and laugh and maybe perform useful, practical, benevolent acts of kindness to the world. So this is your chance. You're now monks and nuns in your seclusion, your isolation. We're all alone together, you know. We're not that separate. We're not that different. And now is your chance to have empathy for people who have less money, who have less ability, physical ability to move around. And to uncover your mystic mind. Because this moment is the moment that you need to flick the switch about awakening, to become more compassionate, useful person in the world. So keeping the mystic mind, but then also taking it, remember to take it back to the world into compassionate action, because love is the presence of justice. Without justice, there can be no true love. So this is my talk on, I did mention the Four Noble Truths, didn't I? There's suffering, there's coronavirus, there's the cause of suffering, which is, you know, the illusion of separation we've created in society. There's a state beyond that, which is us recognizing we're all vulnerable and we're all the same. And there's the path leading to the end of suffering, which is compassionate action, you know, which may be to stay home and not infect anybody, but it may also be to stop charging people rent, stop charging mortgages because people are not able to work, to help elderly people get groceries, and to create a world that is different than the one before, a world without extreme gaps between wealth and poverty, controlling our population and not harming the planet, living in a more sustainable and loving way so that there is enough for everybody, recognizing the basic humanity of everybody, ending structural violence and cultivating peace and wisdom inside. It sounds so easy, but it is a great challenge. But at least, you know, we may not be able to do great things, but we can do small things with great love. So that is my talk on being a mystic in challenging times. I sincerely hope you'll all be safe, and that no harm will come to you, and that whatever arises, you'll face it with wisdom and compassion, and that we'll all grow from these unfortunate events, and that these sickness, this harm, this inequality, this hardship will pass away very quickly. May all beings be happy, safe, may they have good health and happiness and all that they need to live a dignified life, and may the planet be cared for as well. All the best. Thank you. Oh, I'll probably be giving a few more teachings various times next week. It's announced on my Ayya Yeshe Facebook page. And if you can make a donation, I really appreciate it, because I haven't been able to fundraise and, you know, give the teachings I was scheduled to give. I completely rely on donations for running the charity we run in India, where we help. We have a girls' home, we have a women's job training center. We work with people from the Untouchable community, who are some of the most poor and oppressed people in India, previously forced to work as kind of like slaves, you know, working on land for no money, not allowed to enter the Hindu temple, and etc. Social outcasts. And although their situation has improved a lot, they still face a lot of oppression. We sponsor 55 children for school. We make 6,000 meals for undernourished children every year. So it's called Bodhicitta Foundation. Donations are tax deductible in Australia. The details are down below this. And also we're buying land for a monastery, most likely in Tasmania, to create this sacred community, this beloved community, and to create more peace and joy and deep contemplation, the contemplation necessary to sustain social welfare, social activism in a wise way, and to face climate change, to live in a more sustainable way, hopefully implementing permaculture, etc. So I'll share details of that below. Most Western monastics in my tradition, about 85% of them disrobe due to lack of support. So I appreciate you supporting either of these projects, but I sincerely hope that you'll also be okay. Thank you and all the best.